At just 17 years old, Eli Parker was already known in his small Midwest town, not for his grades or popularity, but for the grease stains on his hands. Most days after school, while other kids were playing football or scrolling through their phones, Eli was elbow-deep in engine blocks, gears and wires at his grandfather's rundown auto shop. People called him the Grease Kid. He was quiet, awkward, and often dismissed. Even his teachers didn't see much in him. He barely scraped by in math, and he never spoke up in science class. But there was one place where Eli came alive: under the hood of a machine. His fascination with mechanics began at the age of 9, when his grandfather showed him how to change oil on a 1994 Ford pickup. From there, Eli devoured every manual he could find, watched endless hours of videos, and experimented with old junk parts his grandfather let him take home. By 16, he could disassemble and reassemble a car engine with his eyes closed. But no one outside the dusty garage seemed to care. That was until the local high school partnered with a nearby engineering firm, Aeron Dynamics, to run a community robotics project. The goal: build a fully functional robotic rescue vehicle for natural disaster response. The engineering firm sent their best minds, college graduates, engineers in crisp suits, and even a few retired NASA consultants to mentor students. They set up their flashy 3D printers and virtual models inside the school auditorium, turning it into a makeshift lab. Eli wanted in. He signed up for the project with trembling hands, but when he showed up for the first meeting in his oil-stained jeans and hoodie, no one took him seriously. The lead engineer, Mr. Rutledge, barely glanced at him. The other students whispered and smirked. One even muttered, "This isn't a junkyard, bro." Eli kept coming anyway. He listened, he watched. He sketched ideas in a notebook he kept hidden in his backpack. The engineers were struggling with a key part of the project, the robotic arm. It was supposed to be able to lift debris in unstable terrain, but no matter what they tried, it either locked up or lost grip. Week after week, the professionals reworked designs, recalculated forces, and tweaked servos, but the arm still failed under pressure. Eli knew the problem. The arm's rotation axis was too high, creating torque imbalance. The claw was overcomplicated, designed for perfection instead of practicality. He saw the flaws immediately, not from a textbook, but from years of real-world experience fixing things that had to work. One Friday evening, when most of the engineers had packed up early in frustration, Eli stayed behind. He quietly opened his backpack, pulled out a crumpled napkin with a design he'd drawn during lunch, and got to work. Using scrap parts from the school's discarded robotics kits, a broken lawnmower motor, and some bike cables, Eli built a prototype of the arm in just under 3 hours. It didn't look sleek or polished. It was raw, clunky, and built with trial and error, but it worked. The next morning, when Mr. Rutledge walked into the lab and saw Eli testing the prototype, his face twisted in disbelief. "What is that?" he asked, half amused, half annoyed. "It's a fix," Eli said quietly. "The claw needed a lower center of gravity and a flexible tension grip. I replaced the servo with a torque-adjusted clutch. I think it can handle the pressure now." Rutledge watched as Eli lifted a heavy toolbox with his makeshift arm, and it didn't falter. No lockup, no drop, just smooth, controlled movement. Still, the room was silent. "That's impressive," Rutledge finally admitted, "but we'll need to test it properly." They did. For the next 3 days, they ran Eli's prototype through every simulated disaster scenario the firm had prepared. It outperformed their high-tech design in every category: lifting capacity, precision, durability, and even energy efficiency. It wasn't until the following week, during the community demo event, that the truth came out. Reporters, local officials, and parents gathered in the gymnasium to see the students' progress. Everyone expected a fancy presentation from the engineers. Instead, Mr. Rutledge stepped aside and introduced a young man whose unconventional skills changed everything. All eyes turned as Eli nervously walked on stage, clutching a controller. With a few simple commands, the robotic arm picked up a pile of simulated rubble, rotated, and gently placed it in a recovery bin. The crowd gasped and applauded. Cameras flashed. "He built that?" someone whispered. "By himself?" another asked. That night, the town didn't see a quiet, grease-stained teen anymore. They saw a visionary. But not everyone was thrilled. Behind the applause, some engineers exchanged tense glances. One muttered under his breath, "We're not going to let some kid show us up." What Eli didn't know was that his moment of triumph had just painted a target on his back. The applause still echoed in Eli Parker's ears as he walked home that night, clutching his backpack and the crumpled napkin where his idea had been born. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, valued, not just by a few classmates or neighbors, but by the very people who had once dismissed him. But behind the handshakes and praise at the demo event, trouble was brewing. Eli didn't know that his success had bruised more than just egos. It had threatened reputations. Inside the aerodynamics office, the senior engineers weren't celebrating. They were furious. How could a high school kid with no degree or certification outthink their seasoned team? Their $1 million contract with the local government was suddenly tied to his design, and that made them nervous. "We can't submit a final prototype built off lawnmower parts and scrap," one engineer snapped. "It's not professional. It's not secure." "He's a liability," another added. "If something goes wrong down the line, who do you think takes the fall? Not him. Us." Mr. Rutledge, the lead engineer who had reluctantly praised Eli, now faced pressure from above. The company board wanted control of the design, but without Eli. The next day, when Eli showed up to the school auditorium for another round of testing, he found the lab locked. A sign on the door read, "Access restricted to certified project members only." He knocked, no answer. When he messaged Mr. Rutledge, the response was short. "We appreciate your contribution. The project is now under formal review and no longer requires student assistance." Just like that, he was shut out. Crushed, Eli returned to his grandfather's garage. He slumped into a chair next to a pile of half-fixed carburetors and tried to fight the lump rising in his throat. For a few fleeting days, he thought he had finally found his place. Instead, he was being erased from the very thing he had helped build. But his grandfather, a grizzled old man with a crooked back and more wisdom than most, sat beside him and quietly said, "You can let them take your name off a report, but they can't take away what you know." Eli nodded slowly. The pain was still there, but so was the spark. That night, he decided he wouldn't let them bury his work. If they didn't want him involved in their project, he'd build his own. Using the same rough prototype he had built before, Eli began refining it in the garage. He sourced better parts from scrap yards, rewrote the control code from scratch, and even added solar functionality for power in off-grid environments. He started documenting everything: designs, tests, data, failures. Then, with his grandfather's help, he created a video presentation, a rescue arm for the real world, built by hands, not titles. He posted it online, not expecting much, but within a week the video went viral. People around the world, mechanics, rescue workers, engineers, and everyday citizens, were sharing and praising his design. Comments poured in. "This could actually save lives. Where can we get one? Why isn't this being used already?" The attention forced Aerodynamics to respond. Under pressure, they released a statement claiming they had guided a student through an experimental phase, but had since developed an improved internal model. Eli wasn't having it. He uploaded a second video, this time showing side-by-side tests, his arm versus their new prototype. His version lifted heavier loads, used less power, and remained stable under extreme conditions. He ended the video with a simple message: "You can't fake results, and you can't silence the truth, not anymore." That video exploded. News outlets picked up the story of the teen mechanic who outperformed an entire engineering firm. Rescue agencies began contacting him directly. A small humanitarian organization even offered to fund the development of his design for real-world use. Eventually, the school held a community meeting. This time, it wasn't just a demo, it was a reckoning. Parents demanded answers, students spoke out. Even a few Aeron engineers, ashamed of how things were handled, came forward to admit that Eli had been right from the start. Mr. Rutledge showed up too. He stood silently in the back, listening as the crowd applauded Eli, not just for his invention, but for his persistence. In the weeks that followed, Aeron Dynamics' contract was suspended pending review. Eli, meanwhile, was offered a scholarship by a top engineering university and a mentorship with a tech startup focusing on disaster recovery equipment. He didn't take all the offers. Some felt like they were trying to buy his story. Instead, he created a small team of fellow students and local mechanics. Together, they began building a full-scale prototype for field testing in actual disaster zones. He named the project Rebuild. 1 year later, his robotic arm was deployed during a landslide rescue mission in a rural town. It pulled survivors from rubble, cleared blocked paths, and ran on solar power for nearly 72 hours. The same reporters who had covered the school demo were now calling him a young innovator, changing the future of rescue technology. Eli Parker had once been the kid in the corner, ignored, doubted, and locked out. Now, engineers were asking him for advice, and he never stopped getting his hands dirty, not because he had to, but because he loved it. After all, greatness doesn't always come from polished labs and perfect resumes. Sometimes it comes from a dusty garage and a boy with grease on his hands and something to prove.